Oh, sorry, I think we were having some technical issues, but don't worry because the entire podcast will be available to watch back in its entirety online after we're done. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Green and White podcast brought to you by Argyle Life. On the weekend when, well, what didn't happen? There was a disallowed goal, the red card that wasn't, the red card that wasn't, then was. There was a defensive howler, another defensive howler, another defensive howler, a false nine, and ultimately a false dawn. Football, it's safe to say, is back. Joining me this evening, the minimally dangerous free kick to my unforced Brendan Wiredu own goal. It's Sam Down. We have the Davis Keeler Dunn finesse to my botched Ballymumba header. It's Dan Ellard.
Hello.
And finally, making his return to Green and White after a prolonged absence enforced by club idiocy, it's the Adam Phillips scorcher to my sliced Victor Palsson clearance, Finley Allen. Finn, welcome back.
Yeah, it's great to be back. I'm really happy to be back. And yeah, it went on a lot longer than I expected, but it's great. It's just great to be back, to be honest. And it's I'm trying to think of ways with it. Really, I'm really thankful for everyone, to everyone for their support and messages of, when are you coming back on the pod and stuff. It's really nice to hear and makes me feel good. So thank you to everyone for that. But I wouldn't say I'm grateful to the club because it was a decision that shouldn't have happened in the first place. But I hope, now that it's resolved, I'm glad that they've seen the light and will make at least think twice before making a similar decision about anything that affects some important members of the community, whatever minority group that might be next time. So I understand tough decisions are made, but some are a bit more need a bit more thought, I think. So I'm glad that's been resolved and we can kind of move on from that now.
Yeah, and it is great to have you back. So obviously regular viewers and listeners will know that we often have two segments in this podcast which recur pretty much every week. One is a match run through, often done by Sam. The other is Ref Watch, often done by Joe Bell while he's here. I feel like Ref Watch could be the entire match run through, and the match run through itself could take up the entire podcast because so much happens. So I'm going to try something new and break the match run through down into segments so that we don't have to cover too much ground repeatedly. So Sam, could you, just to get the decisions out of the way first, talk to us about both the disallowed Caleb Watts goal and then whether or not there should have been a consistency applied for Barnsley's second goal?
Yeah, the Caleb Watts disallowed goal, I think, was the wrong decision, to be absolutely clear. So what happens is Caleb Watts is making a late box-busting run into the box. They're sort of both maybe a little bit grappling with each other, him and the Barnsley defender. The Barnsley defender goes down like the proverbial sack of potatoes, and the ball goes in. Caleb Watts, lovely finish, taps it home, wheels away in celebration, and genuinely a good 5-10 seconds after that, after a lot of complaining from the Barnsley players, the referee disallows the goal. I think there's two things wrong with that. One, I think it is the wrong decision. They both got their hands on each other. I don't think Watts is applying any more pressure to the Barnsley player than vice versa. That's one of those where good refereeing, let the game flow to as much of an extent as you can. You let that go because it's neither as a foul really either way. But what is really appalling is if he'd have given it as a foul straight away when the player went down, I would have said, you know what, I think that's the wrong decision, but so be it. What really appalls me, is that he gave that on the reaction of the Barnsley players. The referee didn't give anything at the time. The linesman didn't give anything at the time. But after they sort of all got round the referee and round the linesman and got in their ears, it was almost like they thought, well, actually, you know what, thinking about it, you can have a thing. And you cannot officiate a game like that. You just can't do so. You cannot let the players dictate, because then you lose all control of the game. And then when you then lose control of the game, you then see the kind of breakdown in discipline and incidents like we did see happen. The second goal, I think, is more of a foul than the one watched, and I think he's very clearly ploughed. I absolutely agree that if you're going to give the watch one a foul, then you give that one on Sorinola a foul. But equally, at the same time, I think the Sorinola, the one on Sorinola is actually a foul. So I think that's two decisions that have gone hugely against us. No matter how the whys and wherefores of how it came about, it's two decisions that have gone hugely against us. Zero consistency, zero officiating standards in my eyes. The comment coming up saying the linesman gave it a foul straight away. I don't think he did. He certainly didn't put his flag out. Because it was then time for the ball to go in and Watts to do it. I don't know. Maybe the linesman might have indicated to the referee that he felt it was a foul, but he certainly didn't, wave for a foul or anything like that. But even if he did, it's the wrong decision anyway. So I'm not happy with it either way. Really poor refereeing throughout the game. The one decision I think he did get right was that when Watts was through on goal.
Well, hang on. This is why I said I was breaking down the match run through into different segments so that we wouldn't cover everything in one go. And I was going to come to you, Finn, on this. Actually, I'm sure you've seen it shortly after Barnsley's second goal, I believe. If I'm getting my timeline right, Caleb Watts sort of looking to latch onto a ball over the top. Their goalkeeper came out and cleaned him out / got the ball. Delete as appropriate. What was your view of that incident?
I think it was a foul. I mean, he's not only he's kind of got tangled with the defender, and then the goalkeeper's also kind of come out at the same time and made contact with him. So even if you don't think one person has fouled him, then another person has. So I don't know if it's enough, if it was a foul to just say, give a red card for sort of last man, but it certainly was a foul at the very least. And yeah, I for me, it just summed up a very inconsistent performance from the referee yesterday, and it felt like a game which he didn't really have control of, and didn't really know, like the players, the refs can probably be rusty as well. They haven't refed in a while, but even so, you would hope for the first game of the season that they'd be a bit more they'd be a bit more, on it really.
Into the second half then, Watts, of course, did score to make it 2-1. And then we had truly and absolutely baffling incident from about 6 different directions that, looked like it was going to change the course of the game. I guess it kind of didn't in the end, you could argue. Dan, how did you see that one? You were sat next to me down the other end of the ground, and I think it's safe to say we did not have a clue what was going on.
Yeah, we were kind of turning to people sitting near us, like, what on earth is going on? Because it was very unclear, and it was just baffling. Where do you start, really? I mean, the Barnsley player in question, who should have been booked twice already, by the way, because the incident in the first half, am I allowed to talk about that? When he kind of rolls his teammate back onto the pitch when he's just off the side of the pitch injured. I don't know where that stands in the rules, but it's just downright cheating, isn't it? So that deserves a yellow. Then there was, of course, the scuffle right on half time, another yellow. And then in true Graham Poll style, he almost goes for his, what would have been his third yellow card for a handball. Now, for what it's worth, I don't think it was a yellow card. I think it's pretty harsh. It smashed at him from, point blank range. Whether there was something said, a bit of dissent, which was the main reason for the yellow, I don't think there was, because he does get the yellow card out pretty quickly. But I do think it was a pretty harsh yellow card in that sense. So there's another kind of screw up of his. But then the real kind of crux of it is the Graham Poll moment when he gets the yellow card out, books him, and then starts walking away again, not realising that that's his second yellow card that he's actually given him of the game. And it's up to the Argyle players to then gently remind him, mate, he should be off the pitch here. It's baffling, absolutely baffling. I mean, I know you say, yeah, it can happen to anyone because Graham Poll did it in the World Cup very famously, but come on, like it's just, and it was very kind of symbolic of just the dreadful performance that he had. I do think that referees do get a hell of a lot of stick, and it does annoy me, a lot of the time when he makes one decision early on in a game which might turn out to even be correct, and the Argyle fans start singing shit referee and all this stuff, and they go, completely ballistic over it. It's way over the top. So I try to be kind of fairly, just kind of benefit of the doubt and actually kind of look at it with a reasonable approach. But by the end of that game, and with the benefit of the replays on the what's non-foul, etc., it was a joke. His performance was an absolute joke. There's no other way, no way of putting it any softer than that. It was just absolutely terrible. And that just kind of summed him up. He also let him walk off the pitch to the longest possible corner, which took about 3 minutes. At least he did add on 8 minutes at the end of the game for what it's worth, although deciding to only add on 2 in the first half was also absolutely ridiculous. But it was just all of the signs of a referee that A, didn't have control of the game through poor decision-making early on, and B, just generally didn't know what he was doing. And that's really, really frustrating. We talk about refs in the Championship weren't great, but then lower league refs, and it's a lot of it is well, some of it's over the top, I think, but yesterday, fully justified. Did not have a clue what he was doing.
I want to just jump in on a couple of points. Yes, he walked off the longest possible way. It also took him, I'm going to say, at least a minute from the red card being shown for him to start walking, probably more like a minute and a half. And that, to me, I'm sorry, he should be looking at an extra game or two on his ban for that, because that was refusing to leave the field of play.
I looked at my dad that I was sitting next to, and I was kind of just like wondering what was going on. And I looked back at the pitch, and he's still walking off. And I'm like, what? Like, I've never seen a player take so long walking off the pitch. Like, and the referee did nothing, absolutely nothing to hurry him up. It was just
it descended into a total circus. Completely.
Absolutely. Sorry.
Just to jump in to finish this point quickly, Dan, I'm not sure. Did you address? Do you think it was a penalty, the handball?
No.
Because a lot of people were saying in the ground, having seen one replay of it or just having seen it in the flesh, that the handball was clearly in the box. I have to say, after seeing several replays, I cannot determine whether it was or not. Is extremely marginal. So I was curious as to what you thought about that.
I don't think it was. As you said, we had the just impossible angle from down the other end, sitting in block 18, didn't have a clue at the time. But whilst I appreciate some people would have had better angles live, etc., looking at it on telly, whilst it's not a perfect angle, his feet are at least, couple of meters outside the box, I would say. And whilst he is kind of leaning backwards slightly and it hits his arm, I don't think it's inside the penalty area. I've got to be honest. So I think benefit of the doubt on that one, I'd say that was the correct decision.
And possibly a harsh. I agree, actually. Whether it was on the box or wasn't, I think it was genuinely quite borderline. I actually agree with you, quite harsh to give it as handball at all. And actually, you know what? I'm not going to be very maybe popular for saying this, but I do feel that to quote somebody who may be appearing, or to paraphrase somebody who may be soon appearing on our podcast, I am partisan, but I'm unbiased in my assessment. Obviously, I'm partisan. I want Argyle to win, but I'll be honest, I think Argyle players are to blame. I actually don't think he should have been booked for the scuffle with Wiredu in the first half. And I think that was unfortunately initiated completely by our player. And it's one of those, which is also a sign of weak refereeing, where one player then starts something and then the referee just over and just takes the easy option of booking both of them. I don't think he could do anything different. Unfortunately, I think that incident was completely 100% initiated by Wiredu, who grabs him and pretty much almost wrestles him to the ground. So he was unlucky to be booked for that. He was unlucky to be booked for the handball. So the referee was actually really poor for both sides. We got completely screwed over with the disallowed goal, and we got completely screwed over, I think, with the foul on Sorinola. but I think they got very unlucky with their red card. I don't think the player should have gone, and I think actually we were possibly a little lucky that we weren't down to 10 men ourselves, because after that scuffle between Wiredu and Shepherd, there is a bit of a, like we've seen in the last couple of friendlies, a bit of a free for all, a bit of a scuffle where all the players go in, and it looked to me. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't seen this back because I think probably the Argyle highlights package are probably quite wisely deciding not to show it. But to me, it looked like Ibrahim had his hand to the throat or certainly above the chest of a Barnsley player, which I think also he was lucky not to walk for as well. So the ill discipline is quite frankly a bit of a concern, and it's now 3 games in a row that fists have been flying. And to repeat what I said on the podcast last night,
yeah, Sam, I wanted to come on to that a bit later if we could just keep the pod moving for now. Just to finish on the referee, I sort of enjoy Joe Bell's ref watch rants more than some maybe do. Like to have a moan about the ref occasionally as well as all football fans do, I think. I think with this one, it's not something where we would normally start the pod with it, and I think we'll come on next to make it very clear. I hope that we're not making excuses for elements of our performance. I think it is just factually unavoidable that referee was responsible for the game going the way it did yesterday, one way or another. That's not to say that if Watts' goal had been allowed, we'd have gone on to win or anything like that. And he totally lost control of it. Dan mentioned it, but I was going to quickly allude to the incident in the first half where their player went down injured, legitimately injured by all accounts, just behind our goal line, and 2 of their players, including the one who was later sent off, went and physically rolled him onto the pitch. I have never seen anything like it in a professional game of football, the level of blatant cheating. And
again, he didn't do anything about it. The ref
got annoyed with the
Barnsley.
Yeah, I got annoyed with the Barnsley players. Sorry for doing it, but they felt they could get away with it. And Sam is completely right to say that there were decisions that went against them as well. I believe the first yellow card of the game went to David McGoldrick for a tackle where even I could see from half the pitch away that he very clearly got the ball. It was a shambolic refereeing performance, not just in the kind of register of referees who, we might say through a green-tinted lens were poor, who had a poor game. It was shambolic. It was a historic tier of poor officiating at an Argyle game, and I hope the FA and the rest
One more on the ref, by the way. Because I know you want to move on to one more very quickly on the ref. And it is a little thing, but it was just symptomatic and emblematic of the total lack of consistency. Galloway, and you see probably 5 or 6 times a game at least, encroached slightly from a throw-in, a couple of yards or so. Then about 5, not even probably 5 minutes later, 3-4 minutes later, Barnsley player encroached significantly more from a throw-in, and no action was taken. So again, it just shows the complete lack of standards in the game that were enacted from both sides, and it is no surprise at all that the game descended into the circus that it did with ill discipline. The game was being refereed by players from both sides. Admittedly, the Argyle players were refereeing it correctly because they had to remind that clown, and I use the word clown advisedly, that he booked the guy twice. But the Barnsley players were refereeing it incorrectly because they managed to talk the referee into disallowing a perfectly good goal. So it was a shambles all through, and I genuinely, and regular listeners to the pod from last season will know that I'm not a fan of Muslich, Miran Muslich, our former manager. But the one thing I did like about Muslich was that he wouldn't, probably less so than any other Argyle manager of my lifetime, wouldn't publicly criticise referees, and I did like that about him, because I do think that referees get too harsh a rap, and no disrespect to our esteemed host and panelist Joe Bell. I've never been a fan of focusing too much on the referee. But that being said, there are exceptions, and whenever a game is refereed to such a frankly appalling standard as that game was yesterday, it completely ruins the game as a sporting spectacle. And I think that he seriously needs some kind of retraining, because that was embarrassingly bad refereeing. For both teams.
Agreed. Right, I'm calling time on the extended ref watch / game run through, and I want to stress again, we're not making excuses for the performance exactly, but when a refereeing display is as consequential as it was to the result, I think it has to be addressed first. But we are getting a couple of comments coming here from Pilgrim Macca and from Rob, asking us to talk about what Pilgrim Macca sees as the main issue yesterday, that Palsson and Schumacher not good enough at this level. And then Rob is asking, was it the ref's fault our defence froze for the second goal? So Finn, I'm going to come to you. The defending was absolutely shambolic, wasn't it, from us?
Yeah, completely. And I want to be careful what I say here, but you can't have in my opinion, you just can't. I've watched Victor Palsson a lot now, and you can't have somebody who is an acting captain of the football club when the captain isn't on the pitch that makes mistakes as regularly as he does. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say pretty much every game that I've seen him play, he either makes a mistake leading to a goal or makes a mistake that nearly leads to a goal. And I know he's trying his best, and I don't for 1 minute question his commitment. But I do think one of your main jobs outside of, being a good player when you're a captain is to set an example. And when, like, for the second goal yesterday, for example, when he just basically ducks out of a header and there is a miscommunication between the goalkeeper that, yes, he's just started training with, and maybe that, that better communication will come. He ducked out of a header, and you would expect somebody of his experience and his age to be able to deal with that much better. And yeah, on Such and Galloway in particular as well. Such was just far too weak yesterday. Lost a lot of the ground duels. And Galloway, unfortunately, looks like he's lost at least a yard of pace. I don't want to write him off too early, but he has had a lot of injuries in the past 4 years, on top of the injuries that we knew about before he came to the club, and I just wonder whether it's one step too far for him. Unfortunately, I also do think that we're going to need at least one centre back now that Pleguezuelo's out. Looking at yesterday, we probably need two, and I'm looking at it and thinking, well, I'm not sure we're going to get that. But Tom Cleverley did mention that the defending needs to be better. But dearie me, if that's the standard to go by, I don't think it wasn't too far from a Wayne Rooney performance defensively. It was so open at times yesterday. And it looked like every time they got the ball, there was almost a gap between the midfield and the defense. And I'll let the other people talk about the positives going forward, but it doesn't really give you a great platform to build on. Understanding it's the first game of the season, but it's not really. There's not many positives from that side of the game yesterday, for sure.
Yeah, let's address one player who had a particularly poor game, which was Wiredu. Obviously, his own goal under no pressure, and then he shanked that clearance back towards his own goal. I think he's trying to sort of snap into a tackle and hit the ball off their player. It goes horribly wrong, and that obviously is the precipitating incident for Palsson to then scuff his header. For the second goal, again, we don't think that goal should have stood because there's a pretty clear foul on Sorinola, but it was not great, and there were a couple of other not great moments before he was hooked at half time. John Hill says Wiredu surely would be a better centre-back instead of Palsson. He played his best football there for Fleetwood, but again, didn't have a great game yesterday. Sam, do you want to just quickly talk about Wiredu's performance, and then, of course, some of the suggestion that he's blocked his social media accounts since then?
Yeah, he had a game to forget, didn't he? He had a nightmare of a game. Not only the own goal, which was, under no pressure, it was going wide of the post, but also the sort of baffling missed kick, would it be fair to say? I don't think he was certainly aiming it to go there. That led to the second goal. Just sort of stuffed it back towards his own goal. Even then, the kind of stuff he was good at in pre-season, he didn't really get right. He didn't get his pressing right at all. He could have overpressed too much and left spaces in behind. Didn't get on the ball much. Didn't do a great deal when he did get on it. Just had an absolute shocker of a game. I can maybe give a little bit of mitigation for the own goal from the comment that's going to be soon coming up on your screen from Emma, saying, why didn't he leave it? Keeper should have shouted him to let it go wide. And I have to say, with all the best will in the world, that this keeper does not usually inspire confidence in me. I hope I'm wrong. He doesn't look like he communicates with his back line a lot. He did make a very good save. late in the game yesterday that stopped them scoring a third goal before they did score a third goal. But his communication doesn't seem to me to be terribly, vocal in the way that we've seen successful Argyle keepers be. Yeah, like comment coming up on the screen, a simple leave it would have done. Maybe he did, and Wiredu just ignored it, but it wouldn't shock me if he didn't. And look, that's not saying Wiredu's off the hook. He still, has his own pair of eyes, and he still could have, having tried to do that, could have actually directed it better, so it didn't go into his own net. So he's certainly not off the hook. Look, it goes without saying that personal abuse, poison pen style comments, certainly if they're tagged at him, directed at him, are not acceptable. For full disclosure, I did tweet myself about Wiredu yesterday. That was a slightly sarcastic comment about everybody based on pre-season said that he's obviously a huge upgrade on Randall. When I said, well, it just go, I was trying to make the point of it just goes to show you can't go too much based on pre-season. And somebody did reply to me in my comments saying, well, you're doing the same, judging him too much on 45 minutes, which, well, fair enough, I suppose. But I think 45 minutes of a real game is more comparable to what you can expect than 2 or 3 games of pre-season. But I'm certainly not saying he'll be that bad. I'm just saying that you can't assume he's going to be that great based on pre-season. So my promise I made to Argyle memes in our Twitter exchange yesterday, I managed to keep that snarkiness to under 30 seconds. So I hope I managed in that. But yeah, all jokes aside about that, personal abuse is completely unacceptable. Certainly if it's aimed, targeted, directed, even more so if it's in DMs. Yes, Argyle memes, I did shoehorn Randall in, but as I promised you, it was only for 30 seconds, although probably now another 10 on that. But anyway, moving very swiftly on. Moving very, very swiftly on. Not to be done, shouldn't be done. Obviously, he's deleted all his socials.
Sam, moving on here about as swiftly as Barnsley sent back after the red card yesterday.
Yeah, shouldn't. Yes, very, very, very funny, very good. Yeah. It goes without saying, nobody should be subjected to any kind of abuse of that nature, and those who did should hang their heads in shame. I hope he's back on social media soon, and I hope that he sees that there are obviously a lot of people supporting him, and he is back to his best form whenever he next pulls on the green shirt. And that's about all I can say on the matter, because I don't think, if he plays the game in his career as bad as the one he played yesterday, I'll be surprised. It was just a stinker, and let's just, whether he levels out at an amazing player, whether he levels out at a decent player, whether he levels out at a, middling player or worse, I don't think he'll play as badly as that again. So let's just hope he levels out at as high a level as he can.
Yeah, and I would add to that, all of what we've seen in preseason has looked pretty good. So, I think to label anyone as anything after one game is a bit extreme, but there's certainly some good signs there.
Yeah, just to reiterate, the person who knows he had a bad game more than anyone is himself. And we're certainly not trying to join in any pile on. Equally, it would be dishonest not to reflect on what was, I think it's safe to say, a Jonathan Woodgate-esque debut. To reference for some of the millennial listeners, maybe. Dan, I wanted to come to you because we had a little planning discussion beforehand. Sam's already done it to some extent, but I think you were planning to talk about Luca Ashby-Hammond as well. We've got a comment here from Accidental Pilgrim saying that Barnsley's keeper, Murphy Cooper, was impressive. They signed him on loan from QPR, 16 clean sheets last year for Stevenage. We signed a keeper who hasn't played the league match since April 2024. What was your sense of his full Argyle debut?
To start with the positives, the save that he made to the one-on-one in the second half was a good, strong save, and he had a couple of edge of the box shots to deal with, which he held pretty comfortably, which was encouraging. And I don't think he was to blame in any way for the 3 goals. Second one, he's kind of rooted to his spot, but it's a low drive. It's kind of gone through a bit of a crowd of bodies, or at least one defender. So he's a bit unsighted, and I don't think he would have got there anyway, to be honest, right in the corner and low down. So that was not too bad in that respect. Communication is a word that is thrown around a lot about goalkeepers, and my mind goes back to the whole Matt Macey, Kyle Leatheran debate in 2019, when people were saying Leatheran's the better keeper, he's the better communicator, when, well, unless he's sitting in row A, and couldn't necessarily hear whether he was shouting or not. people just felt he looked more confident than Macy was basically the difference, and people were reassured by that. Does Ashby Hammond look like the most confident goalkeeper in the world? No, not yet. That might come with a bit more game time, and hopefully it will, and people will just feel a bit more confident with him in goal. The communication thing, I don't know on a lot of it, because we're sitting at the back of a stand in a loud stadium. We can't hear what everyone's shouting.
I think.
However, sorry, go on, mate.
I think like the thing is, we've been, in terms from a communication perspective, we've been blessed with goalkeepers in the past, like McCormick and Cooper, who you can literally hear screaming at their defence the entire game. But there tends to be a thing for me with keepers. It's like the ones that communicate less seem to be the ones that, well, from what I've watched, my time as an Argyle fan, seem to be the ones that inspire less confidence in the defence, and the ones that concede more goals. But yes, I think it's probably too early to tell on Ashby Hammond.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, and like I say, I've started with the positives, but unfortunately there were some negatives. Maybe his communication is rubbish. I'm not saying that it's definitely good. I'm just saying we don't know at this stage yet. Yes, you could hear keepers like McCormick shouting his head off all game. Whether that was actually helpful advice to defences or not, I'm not sure, but that's another matter. The issues I had were his distribution wasn't great. He's fairly two-footed, but doesn't seem that great with either foot, unfortunately. Hopefully, again, that will come with a bit more game time. But the way we want to play, either playing out from the back, or it needs to be really kind of precise balls over the top of fullbacks, or hitting the target man that we don't have at the minute, wasn't quite there, which is a frustration. I think some decision making. There was a point in the second half when the ball came back to him, and a Barnsley player was kind of closing him down, but our centre backs were splitting wide, and we had a 3-on-1 effectively, and all he needed to do was just shuffle it left or right, play it out to the centre halves, and then we would have been away again. One man press, easy to beat. He just hoofed it down the pitch, and it wasn't a particularly accurate hoof, and then Barnsley have got the ball back, and it's just such a waste of possession. That's something that needs to be worked on as well. One moment when he could have bowled it out to Amici on the right wing when he had loads of space, either didn't see him or did see him and turn the option down, which is another frustration. And yeah, I think there were some signs that were decent, but also some things to work on for sure. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I think the problem is and he'll know this as much as anyone. I mean, he's been signed after he's basically done the equivalent of like sworn at the boss in an interview. Like, he's done the worst thing he could do on his trial and still been signed. So there's in people's heads there's already this sort of negative against him. And in the first game, unfortunately, he's conceded 3 goals. So he's already on sort of an upward struggle to kind of, inspire confidence, at least in fans' minds. And I just hope in the next few games that, we'll be a bit tighter and we'll be able to see that. But right now, it does feel a bit like, well, why have we signed him kind of thing.
Yeah, I think just the one final thing I want to say on Ashby Hammond's performance, like I say, it wasn't a great start to his career, but there were some positive signs. And I think the other thing which fans are giving him stick for, I've seen some people say that the second goal, why didn't he come out and claim it? Absolute nonsense. The ball's not even on the penalty spot. And I think this idea that some fans seem to have that any time there's any high ball that goes anywhere vaguely near the penalty area, he should charge out and catch it, is nonsense. It was Palsson's ball, nowhere near Ashby Hammond, and the centre half should deal with it. It's nothing to do with him. So that opinion can get in the bin, quite frankly.
PAFC King in the comments says, we look like relegation fodder. Robin's Nest says, it wouldn't surprise me if we are hanging around the bottom But there was another comment here from Rob who says it was a bad overall team performance, defending and working as a team wise, but going forward, we didn't look too shabby. We really need a striker. And I think it's safe to say we were all a little bowled over in the pub before the game when the team sheet came out. Sam Down read it out to the table, said Caleb, what's his name, after he'd said 10 other players, and then did a sort of comedy Looney Tunes double take at his phone. And it was the Caleb Watts false 9 era. It had begun, preferred to Owen Aseni, who I think Tom Cleverley has made it pretty clear with his comments in various press conferences. He thinks is an exciting player, but a very raw one, and probably too raw for this moment. So Wad's got the nod, and Sam, he was absolutely brilliant, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was one of the real positives to take away from the game, and there were some positives despite the poor performance. But maybe I'll go with some of the others later. But he was definitely one, and I have to say, I think this game in a lot of ways confirmed my prior beliefs that the squad doesn't have enough quality and we do need to get more business done. But for the sake of fairness, the one area of this squad where I perhaps am most desperate to see us get business done before today was a number 9. And to be fair, that belief, what I still stand by, it wasn't really backed up by that game, because Watts looked every inch a perfect example of how to play as a striker. He wasn't actually, we all kind of thought he'd be a false 9, but actually he was playing as a very conventional 9, even though that's not his best position. He was making runs off the shoulder of the defender. He scored a perfectly legitimate goal from a very good finish that should not have been ruled out. He then scored another goal, which was allowed. So he should have had 2 goals to his name by, even with the standard of the refereeing. He very easily could have had another couple of goals to his name. He had a header, was it from a cross that was then tipped over by the goalkeeper. He then had
he kind of guided that one with his back. I don't know if it was intentional, but I quite liked it technique-wise. He sort of went up and then I think he mistimed it a bit, but he managed to still steer it into a pretty good effort.
Yeah, he then also had one which was not a good chance from an XG perspective, but he made it into a good chance, which was a curling shot from the edge of the box that would have nestled in if their goalkeeper Cooper hadn't palmed it just to the side of the post, so he could have scored there. And there was the air kick, which we won't talk about, but there were a few. What this shows, and was it him as well who had the big chance at the end after we went 3-1 down? Was that him as well?
The header.
Yeah,
it was. Yeah, how big a chance that was? I don't know, because it
was a decent enough chance. So blimey, that's obviously the goal he scored, the legitimate goal he scored that wasn't allowed. The header in the first half that got tipped over, the header in the second half that went over the bar, the curling shot that got tipped round the post, and the air kick. That's 6 times he could very feasibly have scored. So he was perfectly playing as a striker, getting himself into the dangerous positions, having that eye for goal. 1 goal that was allowed, another goal that shouldn't have been allowed, and 4 more very good chances that on another day, like I said, one of them he made into a good chance, but 4 more occasions where he could very, very feasibly, if the margins were a little finer, had scored. So ultimately, he could very easily, in a not so parallel universe, be sat here on a hat trick today. So he played that number 9 role superbly well, and I think enormous credit to him for that, because he really did have an excellent game, and he was our man of the match by probably quite a mile. Amici also played very well, and to his credit, Ibrahim I think played pretty well. He was a complete, I'm not going to say the word. He was not very clever chap to get involved in that scrap the way he did. But apart from that, he played very well.
I mean, the thing with Ibrahim you got to think about is he did get about 15 yellow cards last season, so that he's come in with that reputation.
Yeah, 17 yellow cards he got last season, and that was with missing 6 games to suspension, and I think a couple of others to injuries. I think he got something like 17 yellow cards in 29 games, which is an absolutely preposterously large figure. So he does need to work on that, and he does need to.
That's like Jay Matete levels, isn't it?
It's even more so than Jay Matete, which is crazy. And I do think that, is now a time to talk about it, John, or are you going to still come on to
that? No, you can talk about it.
Yeah, I do think there has to be more conversation about discipline, just because yes, it's all very well having this mentality of, you're always there for your teammate, you're always there if your teammate gets in a scrap, you're never going to leave someone standing on their own, and I love that to an extent. But at the same time, it has been fish flying about the last 3 games, 2 of which are friendlies. And it has been the same couple of players at the heart of it every time. And I do think that they just need to calm it down a little bit, because, as much as it's good having passion and getting stuck in and being there for your teammates, as I said last night on the Barbican, you also can't have loose cannons. We're going to be a red card risk every game. And I worry that's what possibly Wiredu, but definitely Ibrahim is becoming a red card risk every game, because his tendency to get involved in some kind of scuffle. So I do think he needs to just calm it down a little bit if he can. I know that, comment coming up on the screen from Ben, who I presume is not our Ben from the podcast, but another Ben who said you ain't going to take that out of Bradley Ibrahim. And maybe you're not. And it could be one of those, if you take that out of him, you lose his aggressive dynamic play and his aggressive dynamic pressing. And maybe that's the case, but I hope he can fine tune it a little bit, because I have my heart every time, something happens, I have my heart in my mouth that he's going to get sent off at the minute. And that is a bit of a problem. But that notwithstanding, he had a good game. Ibrahim had a good game. Amici had a good game. And I actually think Sorinola had a good game. Mumba had a tidy enough game. Not as good as the others I mentioned, but respectably decent. So not when he got moved back to left back, to be clear, but that, when he was in the attacking role, he had a good game. So I do think there are actually some positives to take from the game. I think that in the first 60 minutes of the game, we actually out-created Barnsley, and we had the better of the chances. And barring the big defensive mistakes that we did make, Barnsley didn't create a lot of chances. Certainly all of their set plays we defended very well. They didn't look like scoring at all from set plays. And I know it's kind of like saying, apart from throwing up on the sofa and taking a dump on the kitchen floor, didn't make too much of a mess. But apart from those two big chances, Barnsley didn't really have any other opportunities on goal. They had a very low XG. So I do think there are some positives to take from the game. But perhaps people find it funny when I go off on my mad rants, and I think I have had a bit of a rant where it's warranted. But there are some positives to take from that performance in the first hour of the game. But the last half hour after the red card is a completely other story. But I think John will get to that.
Yeah, I'm going to come to Dan just on this subject of discipline, because it was him I was initially going to ask about it until Sam, not once but twice, shoehorned it in. But respond to this comment from Mike Bryan, who says, we're too nice. Miron called it, and we need to be nasty to play against. TC is too nice, our defence is too nice, the club's too nice, and we'll get turned over on and off the pitch until that changes. I mean, that does sort of tally with this stereotype of, typically nice Argyle. There have been times over the years where I've really felt we don't do the kind of dark arts of football as much as the other team. Then again, you could argue that evidence against this proposition is exactly what Sam has just been talking about. We were not exactly nice when Wiredu was sort of dragging their player down onto the floor or in any of those scraps in the last 3 games that Sam mentioned. So how do you sort of assess that? Because I actually kind of think there's truth in it, but then also not truth in it. And maybe it's about the way that we go about trying to toughen up. That's where we need to think about it.
I know what you mean. There's a line in the sand, isn't there, between being too nice, being that kind of optimal level of tough and uncompromising and we won't get bullied, and just being, Bristol Rovers under Joey Barton, for example. I wouldn't say we are too nice, but it's just that ruthlessness, isn't it, that you want. I don't think it's a case of being a bit too nice, or we just need we need more quality, fewer errors, more quality. I don't think it's really anything to do with, kind of team spirit or how, aggressive or non-aggressive we are. I think it's just purely down to quality or lack of it, as Sam said. Unfortunately, hopefully some additions will come in and will improve the squad and improve the team cohesion, and I have belief that Cleverley can still do that, absolutely. But yeah, obviously we don't want key players being suspended. We don't want to see kind of ugly fracas at every single game, and as Sam said, there's been 3 of them in the last 3 games, which isn't good. I think that can be tempered. We saw it with Ballymumba when he first joined. He got into some pretty ugly scrapes in his first pre-season with us when on loan from Norwich. I think he got sent off in a pre-season game, didn't he? And that can be tempered, and I think that will be looked at. But if it's a case of being an aggressive presser like Ibrahim and looking to always want to snap in kind of Panucci Kamara style and win the ball back and be combative and win the ball back high up, I don't want to see that lost because we're worried about a yellow card risk. If he's in that role, he's going to be making a lot of tackles and sometimes maybe coming in a bit late, which means he might pick up yellow cards, and that's fine. That does obviously then necessitate the need for squad depth in that area if we're going to have to, lose him for games occasionally. But we shouldn't, kind of sacrifice too much in that area just through fear of, of picking up yellow cards. So, like I say, it's a line in the sand, I think, and we just need to be conscious of both sides of it to make sure that we're not getting bullied in games. It was very frustrating seeing some of their dark arts yesterday and how they managed it. But to be honest, as I said to you at the time, John, with that situation with the guy being rolled back onto the pitch with a pretty weak or very weak referee, you know what I would have done in the same situation? I would have done exactly the same thing, because it is up to the referee to enforce those rules and to stop that nonsense going on. And to be honest, until referees really get a grasp on that, I know they're an easy target. And like I say, they get a lot of unnecessary stick. However, a lot of the time they are weak, and therefore players take advantage of that. And we need to be, unfortunately, prepared to do that when we come up against when there are weak referees in charge of games, because otherwise we'll get bullied out of games by opposition that are prepared to do that. So it's a difficult one, and it's not a side of the game that we like to see. But I think in time, hopefully, as the team gels and we get that cohesion in and a few more bodies in, we will hopefully see the right balance between being sensible and not getting into silly little scuffles, but also not being too nice.
I think this is a nice segue into the million questions we've inevitably had about recruitment, unless anyone has a very specific point about the Barnsley game yesterday that hasn't been discussed. Doesn't seem like it. Sam, to segue then into that discussion of recruitment, this is about Caleb Watts, and I want a one-sentence answer from you here, Dan Underwood. Was that Tom Cleverley making a point to the board by playing Watts up front?
No, I think he thought it was a better option over Owen and Senning, and I think that was the correct decision. That's the one-sentence answer.
So even Sam, who loves to go in for a conspiracy theory of that nature, doesn't necessarily buy this one. But if, on a serious point, if Cleverley was trying to send a message to the board by starting Caleb Watts, then it was not the message maybe that he thought he would send, because Caleb Watts had an absolutely brilliant game, and it was possible to come away from the afternoon thinking that maybe our number 9 crisis isn't as pressing as potentially some other areas of the pitch. And we've got some comments to that effect coming in. Monster Green says we need a new centre-back more than a number 9, to be honest. And Pilgrim Macker says, I thought we were okay going forward. Our defence will concede loads this season. No 2 centre-backs needed. Finn, did yesterday change any of your priors, would you say, about the recruitment that we still need to do? Did it confirm them? How do you look at that in light of the result? Because obviously this is something we've talked about a lot on the podcast over the summer. You obviously haven't been on until today. So intrigued to sort of get your sense of where you stand on this.
Yeah, well, as you can tell, as you said, I've been off the podcast for a long time, and that's partly down to the decisions that the board have made, or completely actually, and whilst that doesn't connect to on the pitch, I'm also not a fan of how the club sort of have been veering into what seems to be profit over, well, pretty much everything else. And I think that goes. I said the need for 2 centre-backs now, having a look at yesterday. But just in general, you can't go into a season, right, where you especially after the chairman himself has said we've got money to spend this summer. You can't go into a season with Ryan Hardy. He left like 5-6 weeks ago. We've not got we've got a Semi whose best season was at Gateshead in the National League, but apart from that, we ain't got a recognised number 9, and we've got a goalkeeper who hasn't played league football in over a year. That's just not prepared for a season, and it doesn't just set you back the first game; it sets you back like maybe 1-2 months, because say we get in a striker this week, right? Well, they've got to have time to gel with the team. They probably won't be match fit, so they might not even be starting the next couple of games. It's just needless, all this talk about wanting to be promoted this season, and for what it's worth, I don't think that was going to happen anyway, because I think League One's tough, and quite often when you come down, you don't go straight back up unless you're like Rotherham United, but even their cycle stopped now. But yeah, we're just unprepared, and it goes against everything that the board has been saying. It's a small point that I don't know if anyone else was going to mention it, so I might as well. Which is completely unlinked on the pitch, but like the announcement of the players yesterday before the game, which led to the announcer forgetting to do his usual and here's your team Plymouth Argyle type thing. That he's obviously been told to do that. The guy has been doing that job for at least 10 years now and done it absolutely fine. Why is there now a sudden need for this ultra sort of Americanization or commercialization about everything in the club? And it's bleeding, that's the kind of attitude I think is bleeding onto the pitch. And, stop thinking about visitor experience, because the visitor experience will be better if we have a team that wins on the pitch, because we've got better players.
I want to come back on a couple of things on that. I'm someone who has been a very harsh critic of our transfer policy this summer and who thinks our squad is nowhere near prepared. I certainly don't think we're profit orientated, because apart from anything else, not making any profits, apparently, as we were quite bafflingly told at the fan forum the other day, we've had to put the player sales towards covering losses that otherwise would have been losses, and the shareholders would have had to cover, or maybe the cash reserves would have had to cover. I don't know, but the implication of the answer, unless I have genuinely misunderstood it, in which case I welcome a correction, appears to be that we were on track to make an enormous loss last season, if not for the player sales of this summer, which frankly baffles me, because we sold Whittaker for a good 6 million. Yes, some of that went to Swansea. We sold Gibson for 1.5. Okay, we signed Maxi and we signed Beidou, but we made Maxi back. Beidou, fine, we didn't, but obviously still enormous profits this summer. Grimshaw, Muslich and all his staff got money for them. Obviously made our money back on Maxi, got money for Randall, got money for Hardy.
Was Grimshaw profit? I thought that we basically broke even on him in the end.
Fair enough. Okay, fair enough. I'll give you that. We broke, but again, that's another example, isn't it? Of yes, fair enough. We broke even rather than profit. But again, if this is the case, where on earth are all these enormous losses from last season coming from? I mean, did we just pay ridiculously high loan contributions for like Sissoko, Tijani, Puhac, Katic, people like that? Because I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm baffled, and I think that the forum, whilst it was very interesting in some ways, in other ways left me with as many questions as I had answers, in truth. Because if that is genuinely the case, that we are having to put that money to covering last season's losses, what on earth were we making such big losses on? Unless it is in a roundabout way, and I had this conversation earlier in an offline group chat, that obviously the money that the shareholders put in to cover the Brickfield spending goes down as a loss. So unless what they're actually saying is in a roundabout way that money is going to cover the losses that the shareholders would have covered on Brickfields, I genuinely don't know. It was baffling and it left me with as many questions as answers. But look, I certainly don't think that we're what I would say profit orientated, because that would imply that there's a large surplus that's going to the shareholders, and I don't think that's the case for a minute. But I do think we are being incredibly conservative with our spending, to the point that we are becoming, as I've voiced many times this summer, incredibly conservative with our spending, to the point where we are becoming penny wise and pound foolish, which is a line that I've said a few times this summer. And I think the squad is quite frankly nowhere near good enough to compete at the sharp end of League One as it currently stands. I think including loanees, I'm not saying these are all necessarily going to be permanent signings we're going to spend big money on. I think we need at least 5 more in the door because the squad is well off it at the minute in my eyes.
Well, Dan, let me come to you just quickly because this is a good segue. So I was going to ask Dan about loanees. Something else that was said at the fans forum, I think by David Fox. I believe he was asked about this or addressed it in some capacity, and he seemed quite reluctant about the idea of getting players in on loan. Not opposed to it in the sense that, if we identify someone who really can add, then we might do it. But he was sort of saying it's actually very expensive to do. Obviously, we have also seen the costs of a loan strategy in the past where players can get recalled in January and they're not your players. So obviously there's that element of uncertainty about it. It can lead to sort of churning the squad. Nonetheless, do you think, we haven't used any of our loan slots so far, which is pretty extraordinary. Do you think we need to be looking in the loan market to try and bulk up the squad a bit, even if it's not maybe first choice players, just people who can be options at least?
It'd be foolish not to, and I'm sure we are. As I said, the aggressive nature of our style and also the kind of high intensity of our style, something we kind of touched on was how for the first hour we were pretty good, and that was through a very kind of high intensity, up and atom kind of style. But that also requires a big squad. You're going to get fatigue and burnout and injuries through that, and suspensions. So that requires more depth in your squad. But as Sam has said,
you think players in our squad are going to get suspensions this season?
Yeah, why?
I don't know. Seems unlikely.
Okay. As Sam said, the additions that we need to make are in some areas for sure ones of first team quality as well. So whether it is in the loan market or acquiring players on permanent deals, of course they come with a risk. Both come with a risk. Loan players can be recalled, but equally, if a player is performing really, really well, maybe not necessarily in January, but let's say we don't go up and next summer, the vultures might come circling around for our kind of prize assets. So it's a difficult one either way, but the reasonable chances with those permanent transfers is we spend a certain amount on them and then make the profit on them, which is what we've done very successfully with some players like Morgan Whittaker and Lewis Gibson. We've kind of backed ourselves into a corner at the minute, and as Finn said, it's unheard of, frankly. The joke hasn't gone over my head, Aaron. I just didn't think it was funny. We've kind of packed. It's just completely unheard of that a club, barring those that are in kind of real financial mess, go into a season with, I said last week, Aseni, I think, is more of a winger than a striker. And certainly by the fact that Cleverley didn't pick him yesterday, doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in him, to be quite frank. So if you kind of take him out of the equation, we've started the season with one senior striker who is injured. It's unheard of. It's just, and I know that there's still, 4 or 5 weeks of the transfer window left, and we've still got time to get things done. But just because the transfer window ends at the end of August doesn't mean that the season hasn't started. It has started yesterday. We needed to have our squad ready for yesterday, not ready for the start of September, just because that's when the transfer window runs until. And I know perhaps we've been a bit unlucky with the Burrell situation and then the Dale Taylor situation. It's not ideal. And I know that, the club are trying. I know they're not just sitting back and going, oh, well, I'm sure it will get itself sorted. But it's their job to get it sorted. And to go into the season with one striker who then gets injured, which obviously isn't, our fault, but have to have one striker, it's not good enough. And as a result, yes, Caleb Watts did very well yesterday, but we need to have options up there. We need to have, especially when we're going to have times in games when we can't play through a press and we need to go long and we need to have a focal point. Also, you could argue the defence in the way that it's struggling, maybe we need to drop another midfielder back, go 4-3-3, have someone sitting in front of the back four to protect them, or maybe go back 3. But that obviously isolates the front man more, meaning that we need more of a target man, which we don't have. It's really frustrating. And I as I've said before, I don't like to just kind of stick the knife in on the board too much when, it's not called for. But we've started off the season. I just have to keep saying it because it's just kind of unreal. We started the season having to play Caleb Watts up front because we didn't really have anyone else. We just got to get it sorted, and we've got to get it sorted ASAP. And other clubs will know our situation now, know that we're getting pretty desperate, and that obviously means that we might have to pay a bit more of a premium for those players. So we've really backed ourselves into a corner, haven't we?
Can I also say, sorry, it would be easier to take on the board if they weren't so bullish about going up this season. If you've got aspirations of going up this season, and it's not the first time in the past 18 months that they've made premature statements without backing it up, and it's just becoming a little bit tiring. Like if the board were like, look, we need a season to settle back in League One. We've got some promising young players, but we're not really expecting to go up this season. Maybe challenge for the playoffs. But everyone in the club, including, yes, I know it had a caveat and it was a bit tongue in cheek, but Hallett said in the fans forum that he thinks we're going to finish second this season. We haven't got enough players at the moment, let alone enough quality in the squad to finish second. I just think it's all well and good saying, and it will forever be a problem. Yes, the location problem. And, it's nice to have a kind of, it's nice to have a team that wants to be here, right? And wants to play for Argyle. But the only players that will really, really want to play for Argyle are either local boys, which is great if they're good, or ones who are unproven, like Pepple or Senny. So if we want quality, we have to pay the money to do so. And we might have to pay it over the odds for people to get here. And if we're not prepared to do that, I'm sorry, we're not going to have a team good enough to challenge for promotion. You can't both have your cake and eat it, is basically what I'm saying.
Colby, yeah,
I want to very, very quickly. I do think it was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment. Sorry, John. But I did sort of thought, oh no, why have you said that when he said that second place comment? Just because I do think he sort of said it, but he was very self-aware, and he said it in a jovial way of but I have no confidence in my prediction, which I think is his way of saying that in the job he works in with investment and speculation, you can't ever really be sure of the outcomes on stuff like this, which I think is kind of the point he was making. Unfortunately, I do think that slightly tongue-in-cheek, slightly nuanced point may have gone over a few heads, and I think all that the quote will be, Hallett predicts we're going to come second. And I did mention on the last podcast, as much as I, do think Simon Hallett has the best of intentions. He does have a bit of a tendency to put his foot in mouth and make some comments that have come back to bite us, like the risk-taking club one about the managerial hire, and like the there are a few. I went over about 3 or 4 of them on last week's pod. I'm not going to repeat all of them, but that to me, if we're there, 13th, 14th in the league in November and December, that is another comment that has the potential to age like milk, unfortunately. And I hope it doesn't, and I really hope we do come second. I mean, scratch that. I hope we come first if we're going to go down that route. But I must admit, I did slightly sink into my seat when I heard him say that. It was not a comment I think he's going to age particularly well based on the quality of the squad at the moment. I do believe.
Colby 25 makes an important point. I think Cleverly and Foxy have both said that the recruiting problems are not just due to, are not due to finance issues. Quality players just don't want to come to the far southwest, and we have heard some rumor, sort of indication of that with Dale Taylor. Alan Nixon, the football journalist, who I believe knows some people, right, Sam? That's what I've heard. Reported yesterday that Taylor was heading to Blackpool instead. There is a comment coming in today, and I now can't find it, but someone in the comments suggesting, here we go, John Hill, rumours are Dale Taylor deal is back on. Obviously, that's just a rumour. We're not vouching for it. There's a couple of others in the comments suggesting that they would be in favour of a move for Alessandro Jatta from Notts County. Graham, who has been on the podcast a few times in recent weeks, would point out if he was here, I'm sure that Jatta has to serve a suspension for the first few games of the season, but given how long it's taking us to get this done, I guess that might not be a problem. I will just reiterate something I said sort of speculatively on a pod a few weeks ago, but I've come to firmly believe in that I actually don't think the failure with the number 9 is particularly in our approach to trying to land those big targets like Burrell and Taylor. I think that reading between the lines and just through what's been reported on the grapevine, it seems like there are legitimate reasons why it's not the club's fault, potentially, that those deals haven't happened. I think the issue has been trying to sign one marquee number 9 and sort of publicly state that that person will be the striker, when I think we should be trying to get a couple in. And I think that would have taken the pressure off the process. It would have meant that we're not going in this kind of one by one, if one fails, you're straight back to the drawing board approach. Obviously, when we went up with 101 points, we had Hardy and Ennis and Cosgrove, and obviously latterly, to a lesser extent, Wayne, but certainly the other 3 who all were capable of starting games and scoring goals. And it just feels like we're missing a trick and putting too much pressure on that number 9 search. That's my view. While we're on the subject,
coming on that. If this player does come in, if it's Del Taylor or whoever else, if after all this expectation, if he has like 3 or 4 games where he doesn't score or doesn't get an assist, doesn't play particularly well, the murmurings aren't half going to start with all the hype and all the expectation that's been put on this player, partly by fans, but also I do think, as much as I hate to say it, partly by comments by club representatives building up this player as being such an enormous target for us. And I do wonder if there is an aspect of, completely unintentionally, not for any ill intention at all, if they have let the narrative get away from them a little bit on this, because if they've almost fed into the narrative and all the kind of excitement about it's been, who's the number 9 going to be? This target's turned us down onto the next target. And obviously it is true, whether we talk about it or not. But I wonder if there could have been a bit more expectation management of, we're targeting lots of players. We're not going to comment on individual players or individual squad numbers or any of that business. We are in the market and we're doing the best we can. We appreciate the frustration, but we're trying to bring in at least a few more players. But I almost think that this enormous hype that's been put onto the number 9, whenever this player eventually comes, like I'm sure we will get a number 9, even if it goes to deadline day, we'll just panic and get someone in. So I don't really, 99.99% we will get a number 9, but with the level of pressure and expectation that has been put on this player, if they go the first 3 games and they're not doing particularly well, they're going to have an enormous weight on their shoulders, and I think it's worth bearing that in mind as well.
Sorry, to be fair, we have to think about the club, right? They are dealing with Mr. Marinakis here, so it could be quite hard for them.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to have to negotiate with him at all. I can only hope it's all done through intermediaries. But like I said, I don't think we have to worry about Del Taylor. I think he's off to Blackpool, so it's just too evident. So Burrell's turned us down, Taylor's turned us down, and it's whoever the next target is, I think. So yeah, Argyle means saying Hayden Roberts and Bristol City is being linked. I don't know a huge amount about that player, I must admit. I think certainly CV wise would perhaps be the logical next fit. I did hear a little whisper we might be going for McKamer from Lincoln, but he's now had a bid accepted by a championship club as well. So yeah, perhaps Roberts is the next in line for the number 9, as it were.
Before we move on to a preview of next week's game, I do want to introduce this from Nick Morgan and end our discussion of yesterday / the current moment on more of a positive note. Good to see they eventually listened to the fans, and fans can now go outside at halftime in the Lyndhurst to get a beer and food. About time this club woke up to other ways of making money. I was in I guess sort of on the corner of the Lyndhurst and the Barn Park yesterday with Dan Ellard. Sam was in there as well. And I thought it was a great setup. I was a little bit skeptical that fan zone would lead to a huge bottleneck of people trying to get in and out. But if anything, it was actually easier to get in and out than it was last season. Pretty much no queue whatsoever for a beer. Nice sort of atmosphere going on. Really enjoyed it. And I think that was something the club definitely have got right. It's, you go away to other clubs and see, food and drink options kind of all around the stadium or on a couple of different sides of the stadium, and we sort of got there slowly, but we've got there, and I thought it was nice.
I need to jump in. I made a very, very big blooper. I need to correct very quickly. I've made a gaffe. I confused Hayden Roberts with somebody else. Hayden Roberts is actually the Bristol City defender, so will absolutely not be the number 9 unless it's
I don't know.
Maybe it's the William Dallas situation where he wears the number 10 at centre back. That was a good save, but I clearly confused him with another Bristol City young player who I don't actually know who on earth I was thinking of, but I know they've got a young player, young striker, who they might be looking to get out on loan. So goodness knows who on earth I was thinking of, but Hayden Roberts would very clearly be coming in as a defender. In my defence, I did say I didn't know a lot about him. I clearly knew even less than I thought I did.
And when he comes in as a false 9 in our false 9 system and scores and has 5 chances that could have gone in, then that will be all good. We're an hour and 10 minutes in, nearly 1,500 of you watching, and we're going to turn for the last 10 to 20 minutes of the pod to Christmas come early for Sam Down, who gets to breathe the same rarefied northern air as his idol, Saint Stephen Schumacher, next Saturday as we make the trip to Bolton. Incredibly, given Schumacher's managerial chops, it will be a battle of 2 teams that have not got any points this season. And unlike Bolton, we have at least scored a goal. That was after they lost 2-0 at Stockport today. I didn't watch it. Not sure if Sam did. He probably had to put his credit card details in beforehand. If so, Sam, it's only appropriate that you, given your love of St. Stephen, take the early overall match preview for this one. What are you expecting from our trip up to the Northwest next Saturday?
Yeah, I didn't see the game today. I was watching the cricket and then the F1. I did see some highlights. Bolton did create a number of chances. I feel they were a little unlucky to lose by 2-0, but they were coming up against a very good side in Stockport County. I think both of those 2 sides will be in the top 6 for the end of the season. Jokes about Schumacher aside, he very clearly at this level is an excellent coach, and Bolton man for man look a pretty good squad to my eyes. Obviously been a bit of a turnover this summer. Schumacher wasn't too happy with the squad. I think he sort of felt a few of them had been there a long time. They were very much Ian Everett's men and were kind of rooted to that culture. So I think he did say at the end of last season he wanted to do a big squad overhaul at Bolton. I don't know if he's done as much of an overhaul as he would have maybe liked, but he's proceeded over a reasonable large squad turnover. They too are after a number 9, by the way. So I'm sure they'll be in competition with whoever our next option for the number 9 is. Definitely not Hayden Roberts, as we've already established. I do think they are looking stronger than us, though, because like I said, it's not just the 9 for 9. It's kind of all over the pitch. Yeah, comment from Rob saying Bolton had 15 shots and only 2 on target. They got the ball into a lot of good positions, but none of their players really had their shooting boots on, which I guess is a little ominous. If you're a believer, as is the common trendy data hipster modern thing to believe, that there is a level, certainly at the lower level of football, where there's less of a skill variance, is that there is just a level of natural variance with these things that they will even themselves out eventually. Bolton could be on track to put a few past us on Saturday, certainly with our defending. And I also want to say, we tangentially from the last game, I know we've stopped talking about the Barnsley game, but the past relates to the present, relates to the future. And what I didn't say, which I meant to say, is I think they were 3 of the most shambolically given away goals in the game I've ever seen. Obviously, the first we touched on. The second, Palsson kind of played head tennis with himself, and then the entire defence stopped as their player tapped it into net. And the third, obviously, there was a complete blunder between Such and Mumba, where they both left it to each other. If we make mistakes of that level at Bolton, or even if we make mistakes anywhere near that level, I think they've got the players and they've got the potential to punish us. And I think we've really got to be better than that. As much as the referee was not great for us, if you hand 3 teams goals like that at any level of professional football, you can't really expect to get anything out of the game unless you are either supremely lucky, excellent going forward, or a bit of both. You cannot get anything out of the game if you concede 3 goals like that. So I'm not terribly optimistic. I know Bolton lost as well, but I feel their loss maybe gives them a little bit more confidence than our loss gave us. Again, that's to be clear. That's not saying our loss gave me 0 confidence, because as I said earlier in the show, for those who were listening earlier, I do actually think there are some positives to take out of the game. How we played in the first 60 minutes is among those positives, but certainly how we defended and how we almost sunk into complacency when Barnsley went to 10 men. Sort of the last third of the game, we created next to nothing. Almost felt like we just tapped out a bit. Maybe legs were a bit tired from the kind of intense style of play we were playing, which doesn't bode well if it is true, because it's game 1. I think Bolton will look with A, the strength of their squad, and B, how they played today against Stockport, will be feeling more positively in the wake of their loss than Argyle will in the wake of our loss. And I think Bolton are heavy favourites. For us to get anything out of the game, we're going to need to obviously ideally bring in 2 or 3 more players to add to the squad. We're also going to need to sharpen up, stop making such stupid mistakes as what we made yesterday, and be a bit more clinical going forward. And it would also help if we maybe didn't have a referee disallowing a perfectly good goal, but that's where the cookie crumbles. And as I did also say, some other decisions went against us. So overall, I'm not feeling very confident, and I think Bolton are heavy favourites for the game.
We'll get on to predictions momentarily, but Dan, first, what are you expecting from Bolton? Are there any players who stand out to you? They've obviously had a bit of a squad overhaul themselves this summer, albeit to a lesser extent than us. Obviously, they have a manager with whose style we are very familiar, but he's a manager who we also know can mix it up and play different formations and be a bit more pragmatic at times. What are you sort of expecting to see from them on Saturday?
Well, it'll be an interesting one, I think, in that it's, from their point of view, it's a good time to play us. But from our point of view, it's probably a good time to play them as well. They've got quite a few injuries as well. Kyle Dempsey, a name that stood out to me, who's had terrible injury problems the last 12 months, but he's still sidelined. That's a key miss in their midfield. Joel Randall, former Exeter player, good winger. He only started on the bench today. Whether he'll start against us, I'm not sure. But yeah, I wouldn't disagree with what Sam said in terms of the general quality of their squad. I think is pretty strong, and they'll be there or thereabouts for the playoffs, I'd expect. So it's going to be a challenge, isn't it? I mean, how much of it will be about the whole Schumacher thing? Probably a little bit less intense than obviously the kind of first meeting with him when we played Stoke in 2024. What a miserable day that was. So it'll be a very, very tough game, and given where we are, obviously pending signings over the next week and getting them up to match fitness and integrated, etc. I'd be delighted with a point, quite frankly. It's going to be a tough game, and also being on the back foot more and having to kind of sit in might make the job tougher for, again, that number 9, might be more isolated at times during the game, and we might need to hit a target man or run in behind if we can. So Watts is going to have to do a hell of a lot of running again. And as I said on the kind of previous answer, I think perhaps the way we go is just sit someone in front of that back 4 to give them a bit of protection, or match them up and go back 3. Might be an option too. So it's going to be a very, very tough game. But I'm going. Let's see. You hope for miracles, and one of them might just turn up.
Yeah, and Finn. This is a comment from a lot earlier in the evening, but Nick Morgan says it was so good seeing Cleverly at the Bolton game today. That man's putting some serious hours in. I hope the board back him. He's definitely our man. And that was a response, as the message probably makes clear, to the fact that Cleverly was spotted at the Stockport Bolton game today. What do you make of that? And then sort of more broadly, his standing with the fan base after yesterday. I know it's only one game, but we have had a comment come in just a couple of moments ago, if I can find it, which was Tom has blank games left, will be what people start to say if we lose to an unkind word for Stephen Schumacher there. Yeah, it would be absolutely crazy if people did start saying that, right? He's clearly putting in a lot of miles for the club.
Yeah, and was it in the fans forum that he said that he was down here 6 days a week, or have I just given?
Well, I think someone else may have said that about him. He was not present at the fans forum, but
yeah. Okay, yeah. So basically, yeah. I mean, so obviously, I think his family live up in Manchester. I don't know, but that would make sense. And I think that's what Watford fans said when he was manager of them. Did the same thing. So obviously, it's quite convenient that Stockport playing Bolton today. But it's really good to see him, committed to the club, and especially after someone like Miral Muslic, and even that unkind word for Stephen Schumacher. They've previously shown their hand not to be so loyal, and that's what you want as a fan, right? You want someone who completely invested in your club and want to invest. And I think at the moment, especially, to be honest, if we lose to say first 3-4 games of the season, I'm not saying we will, but I do think we'll lose on Saturday. I think a lot of especially whilst the transfer window is still open, a lot of it will be directed towards the board rather than Cleverley, because I think people, even yesterday, as we kind of touched on, saw enough in the game yesterday to say that, like, especially going forward, if he is backed, we will win more than a few games this season. So yes, I think it's really good to see him, and you know, I won't give sort of any inside information, but obviously, you know, all the murmurings have been kind of that he is very committed and up at, you know, early hours of the morning every day, working on the 14s of our football club. So yeah, it's just great to hear, really, and I hope that the board do give the backing that he is supposedly been promised, and I think actually, from what he's been you know, been saying in the press, probably deserves, you know, to be given a chance.
Just quickly to clear up a comment on screen, by the way, from Lewis, Joel Randall was at Peterborough. Wrong Randall. It's actually the same Randall, I believe, who played for both Exeter and Posh. If that was who you were.
Yeah, it was at Exeter first. Yeah.
Yeah. Just on our side of things again. Oh, and I wanted to add just quickly to what Finn said. I think Cleverley's approach to the job has been first class so far. I have personally no interest in where he lives or how he manages his family life, but to see him on ostensibly his day off in the Northwest, trekking over to watch our next opponents was probably above and beyond what you would expect. Given that you could have watched that game back on video, good to see him there. Obviously not essential. It doesn't mean we'll win next weekend, but
Tom Brady would say that our last manager definitely wouldn't have done that. So you know,
he might.
That's
He
because
might
he wouldn't.
indeed.
Well, he's our last manager but one now, isn't he? Of course, but yeah. And I want to quickly clarify, by the way, the Bristol City player who was mixing up with Hayden Roberts is actually Stokes, who was on loan at Cambridge last season and did reasonably well for them by all accounts. He was one of the ones who came up when I was doing my research of alternative options. But actually, I'm going to dig myself an even deeper hole here because he's actually a winger, not a number 9. So not only did I get the wrong player, but the right player was also the wrong target. So my reputation of being an oracle of facts, whilst it may be true for Argyle, is certainly taking a bit of a dent in an EFL perspective. I'll have to get Ali and George instead, John's good mates, Ali and George, to designate us some alternative number 9 based targets, but they certainly won't be coming from Bristol City based on the above.
Before Sam digs himself all the way through to Caleb Watt's international country, and somewhat on the subject of Watts, got this message here. TC also said, and this I think was in his post-match presser yesterday, that Peppel is doing really well and further along than he thought, fitness-wise, or words to that effect. So I think he did actually explicitly say, right, that Peppel would be back for next weekend. Dan, would you like to see Peppel come in? Do you think that actually having Watts as the striker and Ibrahim a bit further forward gives us a bit more of a defensive shield away from home, and given that you're pushing 2 naturally more deeper lying players into sort of the equivalent 1 position further forward on the pitch? Or would you sort of fancy a bit of Peppel's physicality, do you think? I know we've touched a little bit on how we might line up formation wise, but what are you thinking, especially at that top end of the pitch?
Yeah, it's very kind of hot take here, and I appreciate that, you know, Watts was our standout player and did a very, very good job up front yesterday. However, as I said, horses for courses, and I think we're going to be not only on the back foot more away from home at Bolton, but the fact that defence needs a shield, a screen in front of them. And therefore I play 4-3-3, which means that we need more of a focal point up front to hold the ball up, bring the midfielders into play. Therefore, I would play Peppel up front and have Watts drop back into midfield alongside another number 8, and they can then push on with the security of the number 4 sitting and screening behind them. They can push forward, support that front man, and we go from there. So if Peppel is fit, obviously that's a bit of an unknown at the minute, but that's what I'd go with if possible.
Sam and or Finn?
Yeah, I agree. I'd go 4-3-3 probably. I think I'd go, honestly, whilst he did have some good moments in the more advanced role, both yesterday and also at Torquay, I think where Bradley Ibrahim is most commonly played is actually at the base of the midfield rather than at the tip of the midfield. So I'd go Bradley Ibrahim as their kind of conventional number 4. I'd go Watts and Wiredu as the sort of 2 8s, if you like. With maybe Watts the more attacking minded of the 2. I do think Wiredu seems someone
We're
who's very
doing better at number 4, no?
Yeah, I'd go with what Finn says, mate, to be honest. I think he's better dropping in and let Ibrahim go and press.
Well, honestly, I think where he looked really good in pre-season was driving forward with the ball. So I'd give him the freedom to do that. Because Ibrahim for Crawley primarily played as the most defensive in midfield, and that was the form we signed him off. So I'd go a little different. I'd go Wiredu as like number 8 because I think his strengths actually aren't defensive. I think, yes, he, in the kind of 4-2-3-1 with the very fluid fullbacks, yes, he can drop into a kind of auxiliary back 3. But in a position where we're maybe going to be a bit more rigid, not quite have the same sort of champagne total football as we saw at Torquay United, where we're maybe going to be a bit more structured, in that scenario, I would go Ibrahim as the base in the midfield. I'd go Wiredu and Watts as the 2-8s. Now, you might say Wiredu was very poor, one out of Boateng and Watts. I do think Wiredu was very poor, but I think Boateng was quite poor as well. And I think Wiredu, he seems, whatever you think of his ability, that we've seen so far, he's a very motivated individual. And I think, he will be absolutely chomping at the bit to put that right from his performance. So I do think I'd go.
He's also very combative as well. And I think we need that.
For an away game of that nature, I would agree, yeah. So I would go Wiredu and Watts as the 2-8s. I'm going to go a little bit contra on Wiredu. Yes, he does offer that flexibility that if the fullbacks do really push up, he can drop in and create an almost back 3. But I do think if you look at him at Fleetwood, his best moments were kind of the high pressing, high tackling, and really driving forward with the ball. I think what Fleetwood fans did say on a negative point of view about him was that he has a few defensive mistakes in him. And we absolutely did see that yesterday. So I'm going Ibrahim at the base. I'm going Watson, Wiredu as the 2-8s bombing forward. I'm going Amici and Mumba either side of Peppel. And I'm going... ideally, we get another defender in. And Roberts will start, because I think all 3 of Galloway, Palsson, and Such can count themselves lucky if they start. Because I don't think any of them had a good game. But if we don't get anyone in, it'll have to be them because there's nobody else fit apart from Jack Matthews. And I think that's a very big ask to throw a young player into this situation. So I'll go Galloway from left to right, Galloway, Palsson, Such, and I guess Sorinola. I suppose the only other thing you could do is have one of Edwards and Sorinola at right back and have the other one at left back. And then you could maybe even drop Galloway into centre back and Palsson to the bench. Maybe, I guess. That would, but I wonder if that's kind of moving too many pieces. And you
don't want the Palsson right back experiment that we had
no
times last season.
Absolutely not. I mean, the only thing worse than Palsson centre back in a back 4 is Palsson right back in a back 4. No, I mean, look, Palsson was decent enough under Muslich in the middle of a 3 where he was very well protected in quite a defensive team setup. In a back 4 where he's less protected, in a much more attacking team setup in a higher line, I don't think he's good enough, to be honest. So I would honestly maybe just in the lack, hopefully we'll get Hayden Roberts done and he can play. In the lack of that, I would honestly maybe say Joe Edwards out of position at left back to allow Galloway, because Galloway's lost a bit of pace with all his injuries, without a doubt. Hopefully it's just fitness, but I wonder if he's had one injury too many and he's just never going to quite reach those heights again, which would be a shame because he was a fantastic player. But to protect Galloway a bit from pace, I'd tuck Galloway in so he's not playing left back. I'd have Such and Galloway as the pairing, and I'd have Edwards out of position at left back just to do a job and provide a bit of solidity. And yeah, that would be the team I'd go for.
I wasn't being 100% serious on Bolton. I was more highlighting actually that we haven't got that much options, and we do need a left back. So I don't know how good this Hayden Roberts is, but I'm glad we're looking at a left back because it's certainly, especially now that Mackenzie's out, then we're really short.
From my brief ranking of his wiki page that I've been doing as we're talking, he's a left back come left centre back, so can fill either role. Very similar to Galloway himself, actually, I guess.
And our first album, the Palsson Right Back Experience, will be out on Spotify tomorrow. Right, that's all we have time for. But very quickly, before we go, a score prediction from each of you, please, without going into too much detail. Dan Ellard, I'll come to you first.
Let's be optimistic. I'll say an unbelievably, given our defensive errors, but I think we got them all out of our system yesterday. So I'm going to go 0-0.
Sam?
3-0 to Bolton.
Finn?
3-1 to Bolton.
And I'll say a 2-0 loss, although my start of the season prediction I wasn't on last week is that we'll finish 4th. And I said as part of that, we will start very slowly I said 2-0 to Bolton in our predictions that we handed in before the Barnsley game, and I'm going to stick with that. But I hope things might get better with some recruitment. And that is it. That's all we have time for. Before we go, very quickly, Aaron asked if we could give a shout out to Leon, who we met in OMG last night, who gets a Chinese takeaway every Sunday and sits down to watch us. Hope your Chinese was good. Hope we were too. We will be back very soon. Until then, keep it green.